So I want to talk about how do we get closer to God? Because the closer we get to God, the closer we get to love, peace, happiness, joy, hope. The closer we get to heaven, the closer we get to God, the closer we get to ourselves, our true selves. We begin to find our souls or remember our souls. Our souls were never lost. It's just that we forget that our soul is connected to God. It's an extension of God, right? Jesus says, I am the Father are one. We are one with God. At least that's God's original design for us. And through going through life and having to be a part of society and obey rules and regulations and school and church and all of these things, we begin to take on an identity that is false, right? The Bible calls it the flesh. The flesh is the flesh mind, right? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. What was Jesus saying when he was talking about that? Well, he was talking about that the spirit, the soul, is connected to God always. And we forget how to listen to that. We forget how to hear that because it's a whisper. It's very faint. It's a subtle knowing. It's something in your gut. I call it the soul. But when you're in society and you got TikTok blasting on the toilet, you got Spotify blasting in the car, you got porn blasting in the bedroom, you got ads blasting at work, you got the TV blasting. They call it programming. It's literally programming you. You got the TV blasting. You got people coming over and they're blasting their conversations they had. When do you ever have time to hear your soul or hear God? The answer is you don't, right? And so people, they go through life never really truly getting to know their real selves. They know their ego self, their flesh self, the self that tries to build empires and tries to have the perfect body and tries to please everyone and tries to, work their way up into heaven, right? They're building towers of Babel to try and reach heaven, right? If I just give more money away, if I just do this, if I have another 3-point sermon and one more worship session, and me need to do. It doesn't sound like your soul, does it? No, it sounds like your flesh mind, your ego mind, the you that's not really you. And so when you want to get close to God, it's less about doing, and it's more about stripping away or allowing God to strip away the false sense of yourself, the self that isn't really true, that isn't really real. And you can't do that. It's very hard to do that when you're bombarded all the time with things you have to do. To-do lists, and I got to write this sermon, and this worship set's coming up, and I have to be here, and the boss there, and I need to do this. And that is all your false self, your false mind telling you to do that stuff. And I'm not saying it's bad. It's not bad to work. It's not bad to create. It's just, what is the intention behind it? If the intention is that you are truly in love with what you do and you're doing it because it's pure to do so for the love of doing it, then that's holy. That's of God. But if you're doing it because your ego is trying to work its way closer to God or work its way beyond some sort of childhood trauma, or you're trying to achieve more than the present moment, well, then that's sin. It doesn't matter what it is. That's sin. Because think about the original sin. Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, and they were in the present moment with God. That's it. They didn't need to build an empire. They didn't need to build a church. They didn't need to have a worship session. They didn't need to, their worship session was them existing. Their prayer was them existing. There was nothing they needed to do. They didn't need to start a corporation. They didn't need to go here, do this, or do all this stuff. They were just created to be in the present moment with God. That's humanity's entire point. You want to know the meaning of life? That's the meaning of life. To be in the present moment with God. That's it. To do nothing, essentially. Because in doing nothing, you're doing everything. You're in divine communion and divine ecstasy with God. And that's the most pleasurable feeling. It's what your soul chases your entire life. It's what people have left kingdoms for and built kingdoms for. And it's what everyone's trying to chase, is that peace, that unshakable peace. And you can't get it trying to escape the present moment, trying to do all of these things. You only can get it by the still small voice, right? God says he is in the still small voice. Jesus says through prayer and meditation, Jesus says, pray without ceasing. How can you do that? You can only do that when you strip away the false self and you're in constant present moment with God. That's the only way you can do that. And no one is living in that. Very hard to live like that. Maybe monks, maybe Christian monks. Read the story of Anthony the Great. He was a Christian monk, and he basically went to the desert for 20 years to strip away the false sense of himself so that he could be in perfect communion with God, because that's the entire meaning of life. That is heaven. And so when I went to the Philippines, I found myself at a place where, the internet wasn't working as good. And it was funny because I had this really heavy pack that I brought with me with all this stuff. And as I'm going from place to place, Airbnb, I just start leaving more stuff at the Airbnbs. And I realized, I came down to, I had my passport, my wallet, a phone, a computer, and some clothes. That was pretty much it. That was pretty much, all I really needed. And I realized that I never missed anything that I left back in America. I went on a journey of stripping myself of all of these material possessions, and the end result of that was me sitting on a beach in silence. And the first 2 months of that was very painful, very uncomfortable, because I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, I need to do something. And I felt God say, no, you need to just sit here and be with me. And I'm like, okay, I need to build a website. I need to trade crypto. I need to go to church. No, this is church. This is the real church. It's not in a building, right? God is beyond a building. And so I stayed with that. It was uncomfortable first, but I stayed with that. And what ended up happening was I felt like every day that went on, more of my false self began to die, or be dethroned, right? The me that was identifying with past trauma, the me that was, I carry this anxiety and I suffered from this thing in my past, and I have related to all of my past trauma. And God started to take that away. He started to heal all of that. He started to just strip all of the false comforts out of my life. And after about 4 or 5 months of living like this, it became heaven. And I realized something. I realized, well, heaven's now. You just don't see it because your mind and your life is so cluttered with what which really isn't even the real you, it's just the flesh mind, is convinced it needs to do to achieve some greater state than the present moment. That was the original sin. That is currently what sin is. I mean, think about the atrocities that people commit when they walk out their intentions in their flesh or their ego, right? I mean, that's pretty much the bane of human existence. Look at all the atrocities in the world, and it's committed by someone who's identified with a false sense of self that has refused to allow God to strip that of them and replace it with the Christ consciousness. And so that is exactly what I experienced when I went to the Philippines. I experienced this shedding of my false self, this shedding of my identity that wasn't even me. And what got replaced was this unshakable peace, this infinite happiness, this joy. And I didn't want to leave. I want to go back to that. I want to go back to that simplicity of life. It's truly everything. You can have nothing but have everything at the same time. And that's what it's about. That's why Jesus, said to the rich man, sell your stuff, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And people, when they preach this, they really don't understand this verse, but I'm going to break it down to you because it's probably one of the most powerful things, commandments that Jesus has given. He's not saying for everyone to just go sell all your stuff and give it to the poor. That's not what he's saying. He saw that the rich man had identified with money. It was his image. It was his flesh mind, his ego, persona, was that he had accumulated all of this stuff. And Jesus says you have to let, if you want to achieve perfection, if you want to achieve heaven, you have to let go the false sense of yourself, because that's not the real you. Let that go. And he knew it was tied up into his money. So he says, basically, Jesus knew what he was asking. That's why the verse says, and he loved him. And he loved him because he knew how hard it was for him to sell all his stuff and let go of that false sense of security. And he couldn't do it. The rich man couldn't do it. The Bible says that he left sad because he knew Jesus was right. And he knew that if he could let go of his false persona, his false identity, behind that, on the other side of that, was everything he ever longed for. Everything that he ever chased, everything that he ever worked for was beyond the act of letting it go. But he knew that if he sold all his stuff and followed Jesus, that was essentially ego death. Essentially. Because you have no more false sense of self. Everything you've built your identity in as being the rich man, is in having accumulated this stuff and being a man of position and power. If you let all that go, then who are you? And the ego doesn't want that to happen. The flesh doesn't want that to happen because it does not want to lose control. But God says, right? Jesus, take the wheel, whatever, that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve two masters. You're either going to serve God or you're going to serve yourself. And people who are serving themselves. Their conversation is about them. I, me, I'm offended. I need to do this. I'm doing that. Even if they don't say it like that, how they act is very much focused around their false sense of self. And when you come back into America, it's just full blast. Everyone's just operating in that. Nobody can just sit and be present. Like, I notice it in conversations. The conversation will die in the room, and there's that silence. Someone will have to say something. Oh, the weather's nice today. And I see it. I'm like, the silence terrifies people. The presence terrifies people because that's where God is. And the ego, the flesh, hates silence because it does not want to sit in the present moment with God. But when you strip that away, when you go on a trip, you renounce your possessions, you sit on a beach with no Wi-Fi and you just sit there. You just sit there. You begin to figure out that everything you thought you were is not really you. I'm not talking about the sense of humor. I'm not talking about the good things like humor and music and loving people. That's part of your soul. That's the real you. When people say, I like this guy, they're saying, I like the soul in that person, right? And everyone has a soul. It's just some of us have our soul more developed than other people. Some people haven't developed their souls at all. Other people have spent their lives developing their souls. And you see it when you're around these people. They have this energy. They have this aura about them. They have this Christ consciousness. You're like, I love being around this person. They've spent their life doing the inner work. And other people just operate in their ego and their entire lives. And you feel the energy draining being around them. But when you embody Christ, and you walk barefoot and you're chilling with homeless animals and you're on the beach or in the jungle or in the mountains or in the desert, and you have less of what you think you need to survive, and you're in the present moment, it's terrifying at first. It's terrifying at first because true change, true growth, they don't tell you this in church, but I'm going to tell you this right now. Heaven is difficult to walk in at first if you're not used to silence. If you're not used to being in the present, it can be hell for a lot of people who've built their life around distraction, who built their life around dopamine hits, who built their life around endless stimulus, and they can't just sit and do nothing. Yeah, heaven's going to be hell for them, and it's going to take them a while to be able to walk in that, because they haven't learned how to pray without ceasing. They haven't learned how to be in this still small voice. And a lot of people, and I've heard this, preached my entire life that, heaven's just going to be, just clouds and harps and stuff like that. And it's if you can get to the good stuff, a lot of people can't, man. A lot of people can't because they can't get past themselves. They can't sit with God and just exist in the present moment. They have to chase something. They have to do something. They have to, I need to turn this into a course now. I need to go do this. And it's like, no, you need to just be for a while. I read the book, The Great Divorce, talks about that. So anyway, back to when Jesus told the rich man to renounce his possessions. He knew that his identity was in his things. Now, here's what you need to understand. What is your false identity in? What is your flesh identifying with? What is your ego mind identifying with? For some people, it's being a pastor. For other people, it's being a worship leader. For other people, it's being a CEO. Maybe it's the owner of a company. And you couldn't imagine, what would you do without that position? What would you do, God forbid, you had an illness and you couldn't go to work and you couldn't be what you built your entire identity on? Then who would you be? This terrifies a lot of people, man. Terrifies them today. And it's one of the scariest things that in the human condition is if you couldn't be what you thought you were, then who would you be? And if you haven't gotten time to remember your soul, to get acquainted with your soul, that is a terrifying realization. Okay? But that is exactly the questions you need to be asking if you want to be closer to God. Because God is in the present. He's in the still small voice. He's behind a beautiful sunset, a beautiful music. That present moment that's so still, you swear this is the full force of heaven right there. And, Jesus says the kingdom is within. The kingdom is within. It's not up in the clouds, right? We think, well, we're going to go to heaven someday when we die, and we are, right? But heaven is also within. It's when you are present enough to remember your Christ consciousness, to remember your soul. That's heaven. You carry heaven within you. You just forgot. And God's here to remind you. The Bible's not a rule book. It's a love story of God calling us, humanity, to wake up. Why is there so many verses in the Bible where it literally is like, go sleep or wake up from your slumber? Think that's coincidence? It's not. People are asleep in a false identity that isn't even them. And until they wake up and step into their full Christ consciousness, you're going to be battling your ego. You're going to be battling your flesh. You're never going to be at peace because the ego is restless, man. It'll have you running around doing to-do lists. Got to swipe on TikTok. God forbid I sit for a single second and contemplate my existence. I'll probably hear the voice of God and have a panic attack. Anyway, that's how you get closer to God. Thank you for watching. I'll talk to you later. Peace.